There are moments in life when everything seems to operate on autopilot. You wake up, go through your routine, handle your responsibilities, face the same pressures, the same thoughts, the same struggles. Days blend together, and even though you're moving, you're not really advancing. It feels like life has settled into a predictable pattern, maybe even a heavy one. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, something begins to stir, a shift, a nudge, a whisper, and before you realize it, God steps into your life in a way that doesn't just adjust your direction. It interrupts it. It disrupts the very rhythm you've grown comfortable with. It shakes the foundation you've been standing on. When God explodes into your life, He doesn't slip quietly through the back door. He enters with purpose. He enters with fire. He enters with the intention to transform, not to tweak. And this divine interruption is rarely gentle. It's powerful. It's undeniable. It's unmistakable. One moment you think you know where your life is headed. The next moment, God reveals a bigger picture you never saw coming. Suddenly, the limits you accepted no longer hold you. Suddenly, the fear you've carried for years begins to loosen its grip. Suddenly, the dreams you silenced start speaking again. This is what happens when God breaks through. Not gradually, not softly, but like an explosion that forces everything in you to shift. Sometimes this divine interruption comes through a crisis, sometimes through a blessing, sometimes through a conversation, a message, a loss, a miracle, a moment of absolute stillness, anything God chooses as the match that lights the fuse. You might not even recognize it at first. You might resist it, question it, or even try to run from it. But God's movement is not something you can outrun. When He chooses to collide with your life, every part of you feels the impact. And in that moment of impact, something awakens. A part of you that was dormant starts to come alive. A confidence you never knew you had begins to rise. A yearning for more, something deeper, something real, something eternal ignites within you. It's almost like God reaches into your chest, takes hold of your heart and says, "Wake up, I'm not done with you. I have more for you than this." That moment, that divine encounter, marks the end of the old version of you and the beginning of a life you didn't even know you could live. You start to realize that God doesn't interrupt your life to inconvenience you. He interrupts to rescue you, to realign you, to awaken you to what He originally designed for you before the world told you who to be. When His presence explodes into your life, He shakes off the dust of your past failures, pulls down the walls of your old limitations, and breaks the patterns that kept you trapped. He reveals things you didn't see, removes things you didn't need, and restores parts of you that were broken long before you ever admitted it. It's in this divine interruption that faith becomes more than a concept. It becomes a force. You start to feel bold where you once felt timid. You start sensing possibilities where you once only saw obstacles. You begin to trust that every delay, every disappointment, every detour was part of something bigger. God's explosion into your life creates a shift so powerful that it rearranges not just your circumstances, but your inner world. Your mindset, your emotions, your perspective, your posture. And the beautiful thing is that this interruption doesn't ask for your perfection. It asks for your surrender. God doesn't explode into your life because you're prepared. He does it because you're meant for more, meant for growth, meant for impact, meant to step out of the version of yourself you've been surviving with and step into the version He always knew you could become. When God interrupts your life, you will notice that even the challenges that once overwhelmed you begin to lose their power. Even the voices of doubt become quieter. The situations that once drained you no longer define you. Something inside you begins to shift from fear to faith, from exhaustion to expectation, from uncertainty to unshakable trust. That's what a divine explosion does. It doesn't just change your life externally, it changes you from the inside out. And yes, it can feel intense, it can feel unfamiliar. Transformations always do, but as you stand in the middle of that divine shaking, you start to realize something. God didn't come to wreck your life, He came to reveal it. He came to remind you that you've been living smaller than you were created to live. He came to elevate your vision, awaken your calling, and ignite a fire in you that nothing on earth can extinguish. Because when God explodes into your life, everything changes. And nothing, absolutely nothing, stays the same. This is where your transformation begins. There comes a point after that divine interruption where you start to notice something changing, not necessarily on the outside, but on the inside. It's almost like the fog you've been walking through begins to thin. The confusion you've been carrying starts to lift. You begin to see things differently, not because your circumstances have shifted, but because you have. That's what happens when God enters your life with power. He doesn't always hand you a new map. He gives you new eyes. He gives you a clarity that doesn't come from logic, experience, or human understanding. It's a spiritual clarity, a divine insight that helps you recognize what you couldn't see before. You start realizing that some of the things you were chasing weren't wrong. They were just incomplete. Some of the doors you were trying to force open weren't locked to punish you. They were closed to protect you. Some of the people you held on to so tightly weren't meant to stay forever. They were assignments for a season, not a lifetime. When God brings clarity, He doesn't just show you where to go. He shows you why you're going there until you were meant to be while walking that path. But this kind of clarity doesn't hit you like a lightning bolt. It settles in you like a rising sun, slowly, steadily, warming the parts of your heart that have been cold, illuminating the parts of your mind that were clouded with fear or distraction. You start seeing your challenges not as punishments, but as preparation. You start recognizing that past pain wasn't the end. It was the setup for who you were becoming. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you start asking, what is God revealing through this? And when that clarity arrives, even subtly, it changes how you move. It changes how you speak. It changes how you respond to life. You find yourself making decisions with confidence instead of hesitation because God's voice becomes the compass guiding you. You trust your steps even when the road isn't fully visible because you know the one who is leading you. And once you have that kind of clarity, you can't go back to living blindly. There's something powerful that happens when God reveals the truth about your path. You begin to see the difference between what's urgent and what's important, between what's loud and what's valuable, between what's temporary and what's eternal. You stop letting noise dictate your direction. You stop allowing pressure to define your purpose. You start recognizing that clarity is not about knowing everything. It's about knowing enough to take the next step with faith. Sometimes God gives clarity by removing things, removing distractions, removing opportunities that were never meant for you, removing relationships that drain your spirit, removing habits that sabotage your growth. At first it may feel like loss, but soon you realize it was actually God cleaning the lens of your life so you could finally see correctly. And sometimes clarity comes through conviction, that gentle nudge inside you that says, this isn't who you are anymore, or you're meant for more than this, or it's time to rise. Conviction doesn't come to condemn you, it comes to awaken you, to redirect you before you drift too far, to anchor you before you lose your way. That is the grace in divine clarity. It protects you even as it guides you. You might be in a season right now where you're asking God for answers, for direction, for confirmation. And maybe it feels like you're not hearing anything. But clarity isn't always given in words. Sometimes it's given in peace. Sometimes it's given in discomfort. Sometimes it's given in a sudden shift of your desires. Sometimes it's given in the uneasiness that tells you something you've tolerated can no longer stay. Sometimes clarity is simply the courage to admit that you've outgrown what once fit. And when God sharpens your vision, your spirit becomes tuned to purpose. You begin to notice opportunities you once walked right past. You begin to hear ideas you previously ignored. You begin to sense possibilities that didn't exist in your old mindset. That is the power of God-given clarity. It creates pathways where you once saw dead ends. It gives you insight that others might not understand. It positions you in places where your gifts can finally breathe. It restores hope you thought you'd lost. It makes you aware of how much potential was inside you all along, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The truth is, when God explodes into your life, He doesn't just show you a new path, He reveals who you need to become to walk it. Clarity is not just about direction, it's about transformation. When you see differently, you live differently. Because once God opens your eyes, nothing looks the same again. There comes a moment, after the clarity begins to settle in your spirit, when you start to recognize the things that have been holding you back, not physically but internally. The quiet chains, the invisible restraints, the thoughts, fears, habits, and memories that have been gripping you without your permission. And for the first time, you see them for what they are. Not identity, not destiny, not truth, just chains you got used to carrying, chains you even convinced yourself you needed, chains you thought were normal, because they'd been there so long. But when God explodes into your life, He doesn't just show you the chains, He breaks them. And the way God breaks chains is never subtle. He doesn't negotiate with your fear, He doesn't bargain with your past, He doesn't politely ask your pain to loosen its grip. When God decides to free you, He does it with force, intention, and undeniable power. It may not happen in the moment you expect, it may not happen in the way you imagined, but when He moves, you know it. Something inside you shifts. Something heavy begins to crack. Something deep inside you says, "This is not who I am anymore." Some chains form from fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of stepping into your calling, fear of not being enough. Fear is a powerful chain because it disguises itself as caution. It tells you to stay small because small feels safe. But God doesn't call you to smallness. He calls you to courage. And the moment His presence fills your life, that fear begins to lose its authority. Not because you suddenly feel strong, but because you start to trust the one who is stronger than anything you've been afraid of. Other chains come from guilt and shame, mistakes you made years ago that still echo in your heart, words you regret, decisions you wish you could rewrite, experiences that left scars you've been hiding. Shame convinces you that freedom isn't meant for you. But when God steps in, He doesn't just forgive you, He frees you from the weight of what you've been carrying. He lifts the burden, breaks the link, and reminds you that your past can't hold a future He has already claimed for you. And then there are the chains of self-doubt. The quiet voice that whispers, "You're not capable, you're not worthy, you're not chosen." These chains are dangerous because they feel familiar. They blend into your thoughts until you can't tell where your insecurities end and where truth begins. But when God moves, He silences that voice. He replaces doubt with identity. He replaces insecurity with purpose. He replaces weakness with divine strength. Suddenly, the things that once intimidated you no longer have the same power. You begin to stand taller, speak bolder, move with a confidence that doesn't come from ego, but from knowing you are supported by a force greater than your own ability. And for some of us, the chains don't come from the inside. They come from the world around us. Relationships that drained us, environments that limited us, expectations that suffocated us, systems that discouraged us. These external chains may have shaped how you lived, but they never defined who you are. And once God enters your life, He begins to break away every external influence that kept you small, overwhelmed, or trapped. Sometimes He removes people. Sometimes He changes your circles. Sometimes He shifts your environment. Not to leave you isolated, but to place you where you can finally grow freely. But here's the beautiful part. God doesn't break chains in your life so you can simply walk away from what held you. He breaks chains so you can walk toward what He has prepared for you. Freedom is not an escape, it's an invitation. It's the doorway into a life where fear no longer dictates your decisions, where the past no longer defines your identity, and where doubt no longer controls your destiny. It's a reintroduction to who you were meant to be all along. You start to notice that the habits that once controlled you begin to weaken. The triggers that once overwhelmed you lose their intensity. The patterns that felt unbreakable begin to dissolve. Not because you've become stronger on your own, but because God has stepped into the places where you once felt powerless. Where there was heaviness, He brings lightness. Where there was confusion, He brings order. Where there was bondage, He brings undeniable freedom. And freedom doesn't mean perfection. It means transformation. It means movement. It means progress. It means waking up each day with the awareness that the chains that once controlled your life no longer have authority over you. That is the power of God's breakthrough. He doesn't just change your situation, He changes you. He gives you the strength to rise above what tried to bury you and the courage to step into the life He intended for you. Because when God breaks your chains, you don't just walk, you soar. This is the moment your freedom becomes real. There comes a moment after the chains begin to break and the weight that once held you down starts lifting when something deeper begins to happen, something more profound than external change. It's subtle at first, almost quiet, like a soft voice rising beneath every thought, every decision, every breath. It's the realization that God is not just changing your circumstances, He is changing you. He is reshaping the very way you see yourself. He's rebuilding your identity. Because for so long, many of us have lived through labels that were never assigned by God. Labels given by people, by experiences, by mistakes, by culture, by pressure, by failure. Words spoken over us that burrowed deep into our hearts. Not good enough, too broken, too late, too flawed, not qualified. And we started to live out of those labels, thinking they were truth, thinking they were permanent. But when God explodes into your life, He removes the false identities and reveals the one He originally designed for you. You start to realize that identity is not built on what you've done. It's built on who made you. It's not determined by the world. It's defined by the one who shaped your soul. And as God begins to work inside you, He peels away every layer that life piled on you, pain, doubt, fear, insecurity, and He reveals the version of you that has been waiting beneath the surface, the version that was always there but was buried under survival, buried under expectations, buried under disappointment. And you begin to understand something powerful. You are not your past. You are not your failures. You are not the things you regret. You are not the mistakes you made out of fear or confusion. You are not defined by the people who couldn't see your worth. You are not defined by the seasons that tried to break you. God looks at you and sees potential, purpose, and destiny. Even in the moments when you struggle to see anything in yourself. When God begins to restore your identity, you feel a shift in the way you carry yourself. A subtle confidence rises. Not arrogance, not ego, but a quiet strength that comes from knowing you are connected to something greater than your own ability. You stand a little taller, you speak a little bolder, you dream a little bigger, because you recognize that you are not walking this life alone. You are walking it with divine backing. God reminds you that you are chosen, not overlooked, loved, not forgotten, crafted with intention, not assembled by accident. You start to embrace the truth that you were created with unique gifts, unique strengths, unique experiences that position you for a purpose only you can fulfill. And once you see yourself the way God sees you, the opinions of others begin to matter less. The doubts in your mind grow quieter. The old identity that once controlled you fades like smoke. Of course, there will be moments when the old version of you tries to resurface. Moments when you fall back into old thinking. Moments when you question your worth again. That's part of the process. But each time God reveals a little more of who you truly are, you let go of who you thought you had to be. You release the pressure to impress, to compete, to pretend. You stop living through the lens of insecurity and start living through the lens of identity. And identity in God brings peace. Peace in who you are. Peace in where you're going. Peace in what you're becoming. It brings stability when the world around you feels unstable. It brings assurance when life feels uncertain, because identity rooted in God isn't shaken by circumstances. It isn't weakened by setbacks. It isn't destroyed by storms. When you know who you are in Him, nothing outside of you can take that away. This is the kind of identity that empowers you to rise, to pursue purpose with conviction, to step into your calling without hesitation, to love yourself the way God loves you, to stop apologizing for your gifts, your voice, your fire. When identity is restored, you no longer shrink to make others comfortable. You no longer dim your light because someone else can't handle its brightness. You walk in the fullness of who God created you to be. And maybe for the first time in your life, you start to feel whole. Not perfect, but whole. Not flawless, but restored. Not finished, but aligned. And you realize something profound. God didn't just save you. He reintroduced you to the real you. Because when God restores your identity, you don't just find yourself, you find your destiny. This is where you finally become who you were always meant to be. There comes a moment, after God has revealed who you truly are, when you begin to sense something shifting around you. It's not just an inner change anymore, it's the environment, the direction, the flow of your life beginning to rearrange. And at first, it can feel confusing. It can feel uncomfortable. Because when God redirects your life, it rarely comes with a detailed explanation. He doesn't hand you a blueprint. He doesn't show you the whole picture. He simply begins to shift things. People, places, opportunities, desires, and you feel the pull without fully understanding its purpose. But that's the beauty of divine redirection. God doesn't move you to disrupt your life. He moves you to place you where you were meant to grow, where you're meant to impact, where you're meant to rise. Sometimes He closes doors you desperately wanted to keep open. Sometimes He moves people out of your life who you thought would stay forever. Sometimes He stops you in your tracks, right when you felt you were finally gaining momentum. And you look up and think, why now? Why this? Why me? But what if the closed door was protection? What if the ending was preparation? What if the loss was making room for something greater? God's redirection can feel like a setback, but it's not. It's a setup. It's Him clearing the path that leads you toward the life you were always meant to live. And the truth is, if God didn't redirect you, you might stay where you were, comfortable, familiar, safe, but not growing, not stretching, not becoming. Sometimes God disrupts your comfort to reveal your calling. The thing about divine redirection is that it doesn't always make sense immediately. You might find yourself in a new job, a new place, a new mindset, a new season, and you can't quite trace how you got there. All you know is that something in you feels drawn, nudged, pushed by something greater. You might even feel a little lost at first, because every new direction begins with unfamiliar steps. But if you pay attention, you'll notice that even in the unfamiliar, there is peace. Even in the unknown, there is alignment. Even in the shift, there is purpose. Sometimes God redirects by simplifying your life, removing distractions, lessening noise, cutting away the things that were draining you without you realizing it. Other times, He redirects by giving you a desire for something you once ignored, a passion you never considered, a calling you didn't think you could ever step into. It may feel strange to outgrow things that were once important to you, but growth always brings change, and change is the language of divine direction. And sometimes God's redirection shows up in the form of resistance. You try to move in one direction and nothing works. You try to force something and doors won't open. You push and push, but the path stays blocked. It's not rejection, it's protection. It's God saying, this is not where your blessing is. This is not where your destiny lies. Keep moving, keep trusting, keep walking with me. And soon enough, you'll find yourself standing in a place that feels right in your spirit, even if it wasn't part of your original plan. When God redirects, He doesn't just change your path, He prepares you for it. He equips you with new strength, new wisdom, new understanding. He brings people into your life who support your growth, not your stagnation. He places opportunities in front of you that match the person you're becoming, not the person you used to be. And little by little, you begin to understand why certain things didn't work out, why certain seasons had to end, why certain doors had to close. You begin to see the fingerprints of God all over the journey. Looking back, you might realize that the path you thought was right for you would have broken you, limited you, or delayed you. And the path God chose instead, though unexpected, has been shaping you, strengthening you, and positioning you for something far greater than you imagined. That's the miracle of divine redirection. It feels like uncertainty in the moment, but reveals itself as destiny in hindsight. And as God continues to guide you, you start to trust His leading more. You stop resisting change. You stop fighting what's shifting. You stop clinging to what He's trying to move you away from. Instead, you begin to walk with open hands, open heart, open spirit, ready for whatever direction He chooses. Because once you understand His redirection, you no longer fear change. You embrace it. You welcome it. You expect it. You realize that every step, every shift, every detour has been leading you toward the life God has prepared for you since the beginning. Because when God redirects your path, He is positioning you for a destiny only He can see. There comes a moment after God has interrupted your life, after He's given you clarity, broken your chains, restored your identity, and redirected your path, when something extraordinary begins to unfold. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't always show up like fireworks or a sudden miracle. Sometimes the greatest evidence of God's transformation is the quiet, steady overflow that begins to fill your life day by day. It's the realization that you are no longer living from a place of emptiness. You're living from a place of abundance. Not material abundance necessarily, but spiritual abundance, emotional abundance, mental abundance, an overflow that starts on the inside long before it's seen on the outside. You begin to wake up with a peace that doesn't make sense based on what you're facing. You start to feel a strength rising in you that you know isn't yours. You find faith where you used to find fear, hope where disappointment used to live, joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. It's as if God has poured something into you that keeps filling, keeps rising, keeps expanding, something that can't be contained. This is the aftermath of a divine explosion. This is what happens when God enters your life so deeply that you don't just experience Him, you carry Him. Every room you walk into feels different because you're different. People sense something about you that they can't quite explain. You speak differently, you react differently, you see differently, you choose differently. Not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because you've been transformed from the inside out. And the overflow doesn't just bless you, it begins to spill into the lives of others. The same comfort God gave you, you start giving to those who are hurting. The same hope God sparked in you, you start igniting in people who feel lost. The same strength God planted in your spirit becomes a strength you lend to others in their weakest moments. Your life becomes a living testimony without you having to force anything, prove anything, or preach anything. The change in you speaks louder than any words ever could. The overflow shows up in your decisions. You no longer choose from fear, you choose from faith. You no longer settle for less. You reach for more because you know who walks with you. You no longer cling to things that drain you. You make room for what grows you. You become intentional. You become focused. You become rooted. And in being rooted, you become unshakable. And it's not that challenges disappear. Life will still bring storms. You will still face battles. You will still encounter moments that test your faith. But here's the difference. The storm no longer gets inside you. The battle no longer defines you. The pain no longer breaks you. Because God has filled you with a resilience that doesn't run dry. He has given you a spiritual supply that keeps renewing itself. You endure not because you're tough, but because you're connected to the source. What once would have crushed you now strengthens you. What once would have discouraged you now teaches you. What once would have triggered you now grows you. That is the power of overflow. You stop surviving life and start rising in life. You stop living in reaction and start living with intention. You stop depending on your own strength and start depending on God's strength flowing through you. And as the overflow continues, you become more aware of the blessings that were always around you, but you never noticed before. Little things start feeling big. Small moments feel meaningful. Ordinary days begin to feel sacred. Gratitude becomes natural. Worship becomes instinctive. You no longer chase blessings, you recognize them. Because a person living in overflow sees life through a different lens. A lens shaped by grace, shaped by transformation, shaped by divine presence. Then something beautiful happens. You start giving from the overflow. You start loving from the overflow. You start forgiving from the overflow. You start serving from the overflow. Your life becomes bigger than your own needs, bigger than your own desires, bigger than your own story. You become a vessel through which God works, moves, and shines. And that's when you truly understand the meaning of transformation. It's not a moment. It's a momentum. It's not an event. It's a lifestyle. It's not something that fades. It's something that grows. Because once God has exploded into your life, He doesn't leave you with a spark. He leaves you with a flame that sustains you, empowers you, guides you, and radiates through you. And as that flame continues to burn, you realize something profound. You're not just living anymore, you're overflowing. This is the moment your life becomes a testimony of God's unstoppable power.